we are going through very difficult times, and hope these difficult times will soon be over. I congratulate Dr. Vinayak for masterminding this program. So I'll go to the next topic which I am supposed to speak, that is on short and long clinical case, the etiquettes and documentation. So I'm not having any slides, so I'll speak extempore. So you have already heard from Dr. Shashida about how to plan and write the theory examination. I think he has really covered it well, very lucid, probably going to the details of each and every point which has to be taken care of. So from there, we will come to the practical clinical examination. I think in the present scenario, the first question which arises in my mind is that how the practical exam is going to be this time. I feel that we probably will have to change the way it is going to be conducted. As you know, necessity is the mother of all inventions, and then probably I have a gut feeling that this time it may be going to be a remote evaluation, at least from the external examiners, because I think traveling, staying for 3 or 4 days at the examination center as an external examiner is really going to be a challenge. So I foresee that at least this time it is going to be a digital evaluation. Maybe the internals will be asking questions, and the candidate will be, the internals will be at the site, and of course questions can be asked by the externals, maybe from a remote location. Anyway, let's wait and see. Ultimately, it will all depend upon how the COVID scenario evolves. The aim of a practical clinical examination is to assess the clinical competence of the candidate. So that ultimately will decide whether the candidate can be allowed to practice medical oncology or not. And always there is a doubt in the students' mind, and many a times they ask, which is more important? Is the theory examination important, or is it the practical examination which is important? So the answer is both are equally important. And remember that your theory paper need not be evaluated by the same practical examiners. So hence it is imperative that you do well in both the theory as well as the practical examinations. Some people ask, okay, he or she is good in theory but poor in practicals. So is it acceptable? According to me, it is not acceptable. So that means the candidate has not worked in the ward, has not practiced his examination skills, has not practiced his clinical skills. So he or she is good in practicals but not in theory. Is that possible? I think that is also not acceptable, because a good basic theoretical knowledge is required to do the practical well. But the thing is that by chance, if the theory paper as well as the practical examiners are one and the same, the examiner tends to be a little lenient if the candidate has done the practical well, but has some pitfalls or has not done that well in the theory examination. Now coming to the topic proper, that is how to perform well for the practical clinical examination. Are there any secret tips? I feel there are no secret tips. There is no easy way. And the only way is to prepare well, both long term as well as short term. So when I tell long term, means over the 2.5 years of your residency. And I think in the present scenario, for the immediate exam going batch, this may not be of pertinence, because hardly about a few months are left, but at least for the other batches, it's very important that you work.
Just disturbing you. People want to see you. You share your video.
Not, you can hear, no, you can hear well, so that's fine.
I think choice is speakers. He can
okay.
Yeah, so it's very important that you are sincere in your ward work, and the maximum learning as well as the skill development happens at the bedside. And ultimately, your output on the day of the exam depends on what you have learned at the bedside. and not what you have learned by reading the vita. So do maximum case presentations. So your confidence level, the flow of presentation, all of those will tell the examiner how many cases or case presentations you have done. So you have the option of doing the presentation to your teachers in institutions where you have regular academic programs, or you can do case presentations to your own colleagues. And I think there you don't have any inhibitions. You can go put all your heart out. You can have very, very healthy discussions as well. So that is as far as long-term preparation is concerned. So basically what I told is that there is no easy way. The preparation actually starts the moment you join your DM course. And from that time onwards, you should develop your skills. Now coming to short-term preparation, which means over the last few months, maybe which is pertinent for the exam going batch now. So make sure you have covered all the possible cases. You set up revision groups. Practice the skills and techniques of the clinical examination over and over. And the problem with only book learning is that you will look awkward and will easily be spotted by the examiner. So very easily the examiner who observes your examination or the physical examination will, you can make out, the examiner can make out whether you are very well versed in that, or you are not very, or whether you are not very well versed. So that is as far as the short-term preparation is concerned. And then the immediate preparation, I think many of the aspects have already been touched by Dr. Shashidhar. On the day prior to the examination, it's very important that you have a very good night sleep. Do not slog on the day prior to the examination. So last minute cramming and reading or revision of all the topics will only increase your anxiety. So what to do at the examination hall? So be on time. Present yourself well, be pleasant, be confident, but at the same time humble and polite. So as far as the cases are concerned, you will have one long case and two short cases. The long cases you will be given around 45 minutes, and two short cases around 20 minutes for each or 15 minutes for each. So again, the time management here is also important. So you should try to finish, for the long case, you should try to finish the history and the physical examination in 20 to 25 minutes and dedicate the remaining time to document the same. So in addition to writing the history and the physical examination, you should also make it a point that in the answer sheet, you write the differential diagnosis, the proposed investigations, and the proposed line of management. The advantage of documenting each and everything what you are going to present is that by chance at the time of oral presentation, if you miss something and the examiner brings it to your notice that, okay, you have missed such and such a point, you can always tell that, so I missed it, but I have documented it. So you can show to the examiner that you have written a particular point, even though you missed while doing the oral presentation. So that is the advantage of documenting each and every point or each and every history or the physical examination which is pertinent to that particular case. As far as the short case is concerned, you require to take only a short history. Maybe you can write the history as if you summarize the history of the long case and then directly go for the physical examination. Again, differential diagnosis, proposed line of investigations as well as management, you can document. The presentation, coming to the presentation should be loud enough, it should be clear, it should be interesting, and you should try to keep the examiners engaged. So maintain eye contact. I've seen many of the students not looking at the examiners, will be looking here or there. I think it's always better that you maintain eye contact with the examiner. You can use your notes, but don't just read out from it. So that is also something which you have to practice over time. Sometimes the examiner may take the answer sheet from you and then simultaneously go through the answer sheet while the case is being presented. So be honest. What we look in the presentation and in the oral, in the history, is that whether you are systematic, be it for the history or the physical examination. So case presentation and the subsequent discussion which happens between the candidate and the examiner is a sort of an argument actually between the presenter and the examiner. So sort of an healthy argument. And the idea of the argument is to reach the correct diagnosis and the management plan. So the argument should be healthy, as I told, but at the same time, beware of your limits, because some of the examiners do not like you arguing. So there should be a limit for that. And the primary objective of the examiner during this process is to assess the student's understanding and the clinical reasoning. So not whether the candidate reaches the correct diagnosis. So don't be obsessed with the diagnosis. So coming to the elements of assessment. So as an examiner, what do I assess when a candidate is presenting a particular case? So one is whether the candidate has got an effective history taking capability. And the second would be the physical examination. So how proficient is the candidate in doing the physical examination, eliciting the correct findings, and collating the data to come to a diagnosis. So that is a formulation of the differential diagnosis. So that will be the third point. Then fourth will be the planning of investigation. So how good the candidate is in planning the right choice of investigations in the right order, as well as planning the management. And the last one is the demonstration of adequate communication skills. So this is something which many a times most of the examiners don't, but I have seen certain examiners very particular about assessing the communication skills of the candidate. So that is communicating with the patient, how to communicate an investigation, how to communicate the diagnosis with the patient, how to communicate the management plan with the patient. So communication skill is also important. And I think these are all, the communication skill is given a lot of importance in exams like the MRCP exams, especially in the Western world. So coming back to the elements of assessment, I think let me deal with each and every aspect of the assessment a little more in detail. The first is the history and physical examination. So one important thing which you should remember is that the history and physical examination is actually not observed by the examiner. For example, the case will be allotted to the candidate and the examiner goes and sits and evaluate the theory. So the history taking by the candidate is not observed. The way the physical examination is done by the candidate is also not observed by the examiner. So that you should keep in mind. So the examiner, once the candidate starts the history as well as the physical examination or the presentation of the history and the physical examination, will always take the pains to understand the candidate's ability to extract the right history, will also try to understand the candidate's ability regarding the physical examination, the way the physical examination is done, and whether the findings are correct or not. So that assessment will always be done to establish the case facts. So whether, as I told, whether the history taking was effective, whether it is true. So that's why I told that you should always be honest and you should not try to manipulate the history to suit a particular diagnosis. And moreover, it's not only important that you ask the pertinent history, some of the pertinent positive history as well as negative history. You should have the understanding and the clinical reasoning to tell why you asked that particular history. A little bit of clinical understanding or reasoning is also expected from the candidates, whether so similarly, the examination techniques of the candidate, and definitely we will be counter checking the correctness of the physical findings. So that is as far as the history and the physical examination is concerned. And then coming to the diagnosis, always give differential diagnosis rather than a single diagnosis. The diagnosis should not be too vague and it should not be too specific. Like you can't tell a pathological diagnosis. So for example, a lady who's presenting with a lump in the breast, a perimenopausal lady or a postmenopausal lady presenting with a lump in the breast, which is very hard and which is having axillary lymph nodes, you can always don't tell a too vague diagnosis like it is a breast tumor. So maybe you can tell like, okay, I am dealing with a malignant neoplasm of the breast, most probably a carcinoma of the breast. But don't tell that, okay, the diagnosis is invasive ductal carcinoma. So somebody who was presenting with a swelling in the limb, it could be a bone sarcoma or a soft tissue sarcoma. So you can tell that, okay, it is like more likely to be a bone sarcoma based on the history as well as the clinical findings. Most likely you can tell, okay, no, osteogenic sarcoma, but you should be able to substantiate, okay, why I am telling it is more likely to be osteogenic sarcoma than an Ewing sarcoma. Supposing if it is a lymphoma which you are dealing with, so you can tell that, okay, I am dealing with a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, most probably a low-grade lymphoma, but don't tell that, okay, the diagnosis is a follicular lymphoma. So it shouldn't be neither too vague nor too specific, especially with respect, especially what I'm telling is that don't tell the pathological diagnosis. And moving on from the diagnosis, as I told, always don't give a single diagnosis. Try to always give a differential diagnosis. But when the diagnosis is very clear-cut, as I told the example, perimenopausal woman, lump is there for 3 or 4 months, gradually progressing, hard inconsistency, fixed skin involvement is there, additionally lymph nodes are there. I think, and where the clear-cut diagnosis is carcinoma of the breast, you can tell it is carcinoma of the breast. Do you have any other diagnosis to keep? You can tell that it's very clearly looking like breast cancer. I don't have any other differential diagnosis to keep. You can be frank in such situations as well, where the diagnosis or it is pointing to a very clear-cut diagnosis. And from there, coming to lab investigations, always list the investigations in the logical sequence. Even though in our day-to-day practice, what we the order in which we order the investigations, like when the patient comes, we'll be asking for hemogram, biochemistry, chest X-ray, ultrasound, abdomen. So like that, in the discussion, it is always good that you tell the list of investigations in such a way, what first to establish the diagnosis. So investigations to establish the diagnosis. So what I will be, so of course you will be doing hemogram, biochemistry, everything in a patient of a breast lump also as the first. As far as your discussion purpose is concerned, you will tell that, okay, this particular patient is having a lump, I am suspecting carcinoma. So what you will do to establish the diagnosis, so maybe initially a mammography and followed by a biopsy of the breast lump. So that should be, it's better to avoid telling that, okay, first I will do a hemogram and biochemistry, and naturally the examiner will tell, okay, why you want to do, is that going to establish your diagnosis? And some I have heard using the word, first I will do routine investigations, and I have heard examiners also asking like, what do you mean by routine investigations? There is nothing called as routine investigations. So of course there will be variations from examiner to examiner. So it's better that you to list the investigations in the logical sequence. One, to establish diagnosis, investigations for staging, investigations for prognostication, and last you can tell about the ancillary investigations. Probably you can tell that in which you will include all the hemogram, biochemistry, whatever other ECG, echo, whatever you do. And at the same time, for each investigation which you are asking, you should be able to give a suitable explanation as to why you are doing. And then coming to management, management always answer the full management in the correct order. So how will you manage the case as far as the breast carcinoma is concerned? So you should tell, okay, I'm planning for neoadjuvant chemotherapy, this many number of cycles. Subsequently, I will go for a modified radical mastectomy or a breast conservation surgery, and that will be followed by adjuvant radiation as well as the adjuvant chemotherapy, adjuvant hormonal treatment if it is pertinent in that particular case, as well as adjuvant HER2 directed therapy. So when you ask for the management, don't expect the examiner to prompt, okay, then what you will do, then what you will do. So you should always come with the full management. So, and lastly, coming to the assessment of the communication skill, as I told, I have heard some of the examiners are very particular in assessing this particular skill. So they may tell, how will you convince a particular patient as to whether to undergo a breast conservation surgery versus mastectomy, or how will you explain the patient about the entire management. So that is also important. So that is one area I think which does not get much the emphasis in our curriculum, and that is something I think which we definitely need to emphasize year after at least, and the students should be prepared for answering such a question. The assessment time for as far as a long case will be concerned will be to the tune of around 20 to 25 minutes, and for the short case maybe around 10 to 15 minutes. Always remember that the approach and the expectations of the different examiners may be different, but ultimately the agenda is similar. So, the different aspects of the assessment, which I told, that is history, physical examination, the differential diagnosis, the line of management, as well as the line of investigations, as well as management, and the communication skills. So these are the various aspects or the assessment which we are going to make. So the emphasis on each aspect may be different with different examiners. Some of the examiners may give a little more importance to the history, some may give importance to the examination, some may give importance to discussion on the line of investigations and management. Some may give a little more importance whether you have the communication skill. So I think again, as I told previously, the communication skill is something which is very important in the present era. So with that, I think I will come to the end of the topic. So I would like to stop by saying that teaching is a thankless job, and I feel that examinership is all the more. And it's really difficult actually for the examiner. The clinical case presentation and discussion is an art. And what is the art? The art of answering what the examiner expects and what the examiner knows. So that is a reality. I will not tell that it is 100% foolproof. So it's an art. How can you learn this art? You learn this art by practicing it over the years. And with that, I'll stop and wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think a lot of questions are still coming. We'll take it end of the thing. Is it okay, sir? Shall we take it in the end?
Yeah, fine. We'll take it there.
So coming to, we have finished the theory examination, practical examination, and next comes Viva OC. So I think I'll call our next speaker, Dr. Venkatramana. He's from Adyar. Sir, I'm unmuting you, sir. Can you hear you, sir?
Thank you, Dr. Vinayak. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. I think I think he's the expertise hand in training students for final year examination. So any examination is not complete without COPE orientation. So handing over to sir.
Yeah. As I said, very unfortunate we couldn't have COPE this year, because COPE is like a mini revision for the exam and gives an idea for many students as to how the practicals, theory, slides, and the Viva voice is held. Viva is actually the fag end of the exam. And by this time, the examiners are tired, the students are tired. Usually it's the afternoon and many examiners are already feeling sleepy, or they wanting to catch their flights. And most of the decision regarding, whether a candidate has done well or not done well has already been made based on the long case and short case performance. So Viva is like for candidates who are going to get gold medal, it has to decide whether this person deserves a gold medal, or if somebody is really borderline, to see how's the theory knowledge and to help him out to pass. So again, Viva, what I would say is that Viva, there is no syllabus for Viva. Anything can be asked. You will have 4 examiners, each one of different age. Some of them are seniors, some of them are middle-aged, varying experiences, varying fields of interest. You may have somebody interested in solid tumor, somebody interested in hematology, somebody in pediatrics, statistics, tumor history, molecular oncology, and something which they might have read just a week back or 2 weeks back that might just come in their mind and they might ask. So the thing about Viva is not to get stressed. Don't think about your performance in the morning. Eat a good lunch, and when called, go there, sit and be calm. Don't shake your body. Don't shake your legs. You don't have to be a coconut tree there. Just stay calm and focus. Because how you appear confident as a doctor also makes a big impression on the examiners to see, how you're going to handle. The idea is that when you pass the exam, when you go back to the society, you're a safe oncologist. We don't want you to be Nobel Prize winners. We want you to be safe. That is, you know what to do when a patient comes and you will not do any harm. And you should first create an impression that you're a safe doctor. So you stay cool and calm and, stay calm in the Viva. Don't sit and brood about what happened in your long case and short case. What has happened has happened. Viva is an opportunity to show, that, you're good and you know your subject. First thing is that make sure that you know your thesis well, because sometimes the thesis is evaluated during the Viva. Make sure you know your primary and objectives, primary endpoints, secondary endpoints, your results. I have seen students who can't even tell their thesis topics. They forget the thesis topics. So that means, that you have not done your thesis sincerely. Many examiners are also correct your thesis. So they might pick up problems with your methodology or your results. So before the exam, at least 1 day or 2 days before your practical exam, kindly go through your thesis. In many universities, thesis is no longer there. You have to write a paper, research paper, a poster, and have an oral presentation. So again, be thorough with all these things, because you'll be asked what paper did you write, how was it written, and it can go on to how is research done and basic statistics. Ensure that you're thorough with all the academic activities which you have done. Another thing which is usually checked in the Viva is logbook. So all my experiences have been with the Tamil Nadu Medical Engineering University or AIIMS or JIPMER, because I've been examiners there. And do not please write your logbook just 1 month before the exam, because it is very clear that almost the handwriting is same, the pen color is same, and almost all the logbooks of all the residents have the same content. And I have seen many examiners getting really upset and wanting to fail students because they were not sincere enough in writing their logbooks. So please start writing your logbooks from day one. Every day, just spend 10 minutes. And I'm sure your logbook will have a lot of variety if you are writing daily rather than sitting and copying somebody else's logbooks. And these logbooks are also helpful if you're going for training abroad, like in UK or Canada or Australia, because it is a proof of your training that you have done all these procedures or seen such cases or made these presentations. The other thing is that in the next thing in the Viva is that at least try to be up to date with 1 or 2 recent articles in NEJM or the Lancet, some randomized trial. Every week you have so many randomized trials coming, and the examiners might ask you what was a recent study you read or what article you read. And if you are thinking and looking here and there at the ceiling, they might think that you're not interested in looking at journals. This is another thing which I found is that many medical oncology residents do not subscribe to alerts from journals like NEJM, Lancet, or JCO. All you need to do is go and give your email ID, and every week you will get alerts on the latest contents and new articles. Many of you are not in Twitter, then I would recommend go on to Twitter, because Twitter, everything which is being published comes on Twitter, and you don't need to read the whole article. Sometimes the author himself gives you a gist of what is being done. So you can confidently answer that, yes, sir, I read this randomized trial of XYZ, then this was the results seen. The idea of looking at whether you've read journals or not is to see whether you're up to date. Because as I said, oncology is a very rapidly progressing field, and everything keeps on changing. And you have to be on your toes, and you should know what is the latest. So definitely that's one way. I always ask students, what is the latest article you've read, and many of them, and it's sometimes the stuff you can't just remember what you read. Better to have a prepared answer that I've read so and so. It takes 5 minutes. Just it could be a journal club which your friend has presented in the last 2-3 months. Just go through the slides quickly, and you can always answer all those things. Another thing in Viva is that especially in places where they correct your theory papers, at least in AIIMS and in JIPMER, the examiner corrects the theory paper during the Viva voicey sometimes, or during the practicals. So read up on questions which you found difficult while we're answering the theory paper, because they will ask, you know, or you might have made a genuine mistake and they say that you have done this mistake. You can say, yes, sir, I did this mistake, but I've gone and read it up and I can tell you again. People don't like it, you know, if you're not in a theory well and you're not gone back and read the question again and you're not come prepared. Sometimes during the practicals, the examiner might tell you that, you know, why don't you go and read it up during lunch and tell me this viva? Please do that. You know, do not think that the question won't be asked. That's an opportunity being given to you to, you know, rectify the mistake and get some additional marks. So make sure that you go through your theory paper once, at least in cases where it is corrected by the same examiner, and make sure that you read up and come with a good answer. Again, while answering in the Viva, as I said, there is no syllabus for Viva. So please do not give telegraphic answers like yes, I am, you know, 1 word, 2 words. Try to at least have full sentences. Try to appear confident. You can take a pause. You need not start answering before the examiner even finishes his question. Let the examiner finish the question. If you want some time, you can say, give me some time to think. And that doesn't mean you take 2-3 minutes, about 10 to 15 seconds. If you do not know the answer for the question, please say you don't know the answer. You know, don't try to beat around the bush, because it wastes your time and wastes examiner's time. And that question is gone. You can score more points in the next question. And as I said, the questions tend to increase in difficulty the more you keep on answering. So don't be bothered if you are not managed to answer the 10th question, because you managed to answer all the 9 difficult questions. The examiner has to sometimes prove that he knows more than you. So he will keep on asking questions till you stop. At the same time, if you're not answering the question, usually the next question is of less difficulty than the first question. So it doesn't mean that you need to know the answers for everything. None of us know answers to everything. If you don't know, you say, I don't know, I'll read up and I'll come. Again, for trials, at least I don't expect people to know the names of the trials, the exact hazard ratio, the number of people. I just want to know that what was the main practice changing part of the trial, and what are the limitations and strengths of the study. So no need remembering all the ECOG, SWOG numbers, and it doesn't really help. And you're going to forget it in next few days. And if you know the examiner's area, if you know your examiners beforehand, if you know their areas of expertise, it's always better to brush up on those subjects, because usually they tend to ask what they are good at, and they don't tend to go into subjects in which they're usually not practicing. Anything else? I think I have covered. Anything else you want me to cover, Vinayak?
I think this is fine. I think we'll have it in discussion. I think students have not asked any questions.
Yeah, they can ask questions, so then we can I can answer.
That's a better idea, actually. Even faculty can in with some ideas. So I have taken few questions from the common faculty, so we can go through later.
Yes.
So I shall have the Vishwajit thing then.
Then we can take the questions. Yeah, you can have Vishwajit. Thank you.
Hello, sir. Can you hear me? Sir, can you hear me?
Yeah, Dr. Vishwajit here.
Yes, sir. You can share the screen, sir.
Yeah. I will. Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Vinayak. It was we had 3 good lectures from 3 examiners, and the last part of the exam is usually the drugs, instruments, and the images. So as Dr. Venkat said, that this would be the last end of the exam, and you are tired from the clinical examination after completing 3 or 4 cases. And we come to the last part, which is the Viva VOC, drugs and images. So again, this drugs and images and Viva VOC, again, as Venkat had said, that it is very useful for people who are going to do very well, aiming for a gold medal, and also the people who are in the borderline, especially not done well in the practical exam. So it still makes a difference, because don't get disheartened if your practical exam goes a little bad and you're on the borderline. You could still make it up in your drugs and in your Viva VOC. So when you prepare for drugs, you need to have a scheme of preparing each of these drugs under some headings. So like you need to do or look at the mechanism of action, look at the indications, look at the dose and administration, look at the side effects, the vial and the tablet strength, the cost of the drug in the country, and the last but not the least is look at the clinical trials and the evidence. So each of this is important. The examiner might ask you on any specific topic, may ask only on the mechanism of action, might ask on only adverse effects. So you need to prepare each of this heading separately and be ready to immediately answer the question. The other areas where there are some issues like indications, for example, if there is a paclitaxel, you cannot say indication is only ovarian cancer, lung cancer. So that is not acceptable. You need to be more specific in your answer, in which situation you would give, in which line of therapy you would give, then the answer is complete. Similarly, the dose and administration should be very clear. The administration of the drugs might be different from various institutes. For example, a cisplatin you might give differently in your institute, and in another institute might follow differently. So if there is such a situation, then you can be confident that and tell your examiner that this is what you are practicing at your institute. But be sure on the administration of the drug in a given protocol. The adverse effects, again, we should understand that adverse effects have to be in terms of frequency of the adverse effects in terms of grade 3 and grade 4, and also the uniqueness of the adverse effects for a particular drug. So for any drug, don't keep telling that it is diarrhea, vomiting, nausea, which will not be acceptable. So it's important to understand the frequency. More than 10% of adverse effects in grade 3, grade 4 happening in a particular drug. Remember that. And again, remember specific side effects of drug like hand-foot syndrome in a particular drug like capecitabine. The other issue is on the strength, the vial and the tablet strength. Most of us don't remember. In your exam, when we ask, you don't tell. And that is very, very important in terms of two things. It also reflects whether you have actually mixed a chemotherapy and administered or not. And it also helps us that when you prescribe a particular tablet or a vial to a patient, you also need to know the strength, because you are going to give a prescription and the patient has to buy. So it's mandatory that you understand what is the vial strength and the tablet strength. The drug cost also you should know, at least the Indian drug cost in INR, at least for costly drugs and other drugs, you should have some drug cost analysis available with you. The last but not the least, the evidence with respect to clinical trials, at least significant clinical trials which has led to the approval of a particular drug, you should remember when you are preparing for the drugs. Also remember that the drugs come under certain headings like the cytotoxic drugs, the monoclonal antibodies, small molecular inhibitors, immunotherapy, and don't forget the supportive drugs like antiemetics, antibiotics, bisphosphonates, etc. So you need to know all the types of drugs. So what is expected from you is like at least the cytotoxic drugs you should know. Common drugs which we use like cisplatin, anthracyclines, paclitaxel, docetaxel. So these drugs, if you are not able to answer the mechanism of action, you don't know the dose, strength and administration, then the examiners are very upset about it, because it reflects poorly on your training if you are actually not able to answer these drugs. Similarly, monoclonal antibodies, small molecular inhibitors, if you are using these drugs in your practice, it's fine. There are some centers training like government hospitals or institutes where the frequency of using these drugs may not be very high. The examiners may not mind if you do not answer this. But cytotoxic drugs, you need to know. I mean, no excuse for not knowing the cytotoxic drugs. When you're also preparing, don't forget some of the policy documents with respect to antibiotic policies, antifungal policies, antiviral with respect to prophylaxis and treatment. So you need to prepare this separately. Also, always remember antiemetic. You will definitely, the examiner will ask a question or two on the antiemetics. So be prepared on the antiemetic policy at your institute. What is the guideline? What would you do if you have a high emetogenic drug, a moderately emetogenic drug, a mildly emetogenic drug. So you be clear on your antiemetic protocol. Other things they could ask is on extravasation management. Again, you have policy documents on TKI toxicity like management of mucositis, management of diarrhea, management of hand-foot syndrome. So make sure that you prepare all this in detail. Similarly, on immunotherapy adverse effects and guidelines for using bisphosphonates. So general tips for the drugs. Drugs are the bread and butter for medical oncology. You need to know everything. There is no excuse for not knowing drugs. Like for a surgeon, surgery is important. For medical oncologists, drugs are important. And we should know each and everything on what drugs we use. It greatly reflects on at a training at a center. It also reflects your training at your center. So drugs are very, very important. You need to prepare it over the 2-3 years of your residency and have a clear-cut answer to all the drugs. Choosing the drug, many times either the examiner chooses the drug or the candidate is asked to choose the drug. So most of the time how this is decided is the candidate has done very, very well. Then the examiner will take a particular drug and then he will take and ask questions. If the candidate is borderline, then the candidate will be allowed to choose the drug. In such a situation, you come prepared with 2 or 3 drugs, which you know very well with respect to all that I discussed previously, and pick up that particular drug and answer them well. So commonly used drugs, read them well in detail. Administration protocol, as I already told you, if your institute follows a particular policy, you stick to that policy and answer. Indications, again, be very specific and it should be evidence-based. With respect to instruments and procedures, these are the common instruments which we generally keep during the exam. Bone marrow needles, lumbar puncture needles, central venous access devices, biopsy needles, nasogastric tube, and if you are doing transplant, sometimes you might they might keep stem cell cryopreservation bags for questioning. So when you are doing the instruments, always remember the indication for the procedure. Again, be very specific. For example, let's take lumbar puncture. You need to tell the diagnostic and therapeutic indications. So somebody might ask you what are the indications for doing a lumbar puncture as diagnostic in lymphomas. Then be clear, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you need to tell what are the indications. What precautions will you take before doing the lumbar puncture? What should be the platelet count? And how will you perform it? How will you perform, for example, in a lumbar puncture is very important, especially in acute lymphoblastic leukemia. You know that you should not create a traumatic tap. The traumatic tap will result in increase the CNS risk by CNS3. So this information you should be very clear, and how you do the procedure. Complications related to the procedure, again with respect to lumbar puncture, what kind of complications they can develop. You should also know what drugs can be given through a lumbar puncture. Triple intrathecal you are giving, what drugs will you give? What is the dose of each of these drugs? What are the do's and don'ts of doing while performing the procedure? So what we are trying to assess from all this is that we want to know whether the candidates are trained in this common procedures. And I believe that all the centers, at least for the basic minimum procedures which I had listed out, I think the candidate should undergo some training or the other. Also, we should also understand that you might perform these procedures in future. You may not perform. For example, central venous catheters, I know in many centers are being performed by the anesthetist, and you may not be directly doing the procedure, but it is still important to understand, because whenever you have a troubleshooting with respect to a common procedure, a procedure related complication, then unless you have gone through the process of doing each of these procedures, you will not be able to understand. That is why it is important that a basic minimum training for these common procedures be given at all centers, and you should learn it during your training. The other areas are on lab and molecular investigations, which are now a part and parcel of our management, and we should know something about each of this lab or molecular investigations done. Common ones are immunohistochemistry, FISH, cytogenetics, flow cytometry, nucleic acid extraction, PCRs, real-time PCRs, sequencing, which includes Sanger's or NGS, and liquid biopsy. So this during examination, many times we have found that the candidates are not able to relate what investigation has to be performed when. For example, if you say, we have asked questions like, could you do BCR-ABL? How would you do BCR-ABL by flow? It's not correct. So how do you do a FLIT3 examination or an NPM? You would not do it by flow. So you should be able to at least basically be able to tell what investigation, by what method, how will you send the sample, how will you interpret the sample is very, very important. The common investigations which we generally use is one, flow cytometry for leukemia. So basic principles of flow you need to know, interpret the markers, how to differentiate it between a T leukemia or a B leukemia or a ALL and an AML. The other thing is on BCR-ABL. So BCR-ABL, you should remember that how to interpret the study, how the sample is sent, what do you understand by MR4, MR4.5. So all these questions, if you are able to read a report, then you will be able to answer all these questions very easily. Similarly, HER2/neu on FISH. So when will you do the test? What is a dual FISH? What is a single FISH? Single probe FISH, dual probe FISH. Similarly, EGFR, ALK, how will you test them? EGFR by NGS, or will you use a PCR? ALK by IHC. Similarly, PDL1 testing, what are the various platforms available for PDL1 testing? Other molecular testing like BRCA, what is tumor mutational burden? Some infection like CMV, at what level you will start therapy. So all this you need to understand the investigation, what investigation you need to send and when to do. So the principles of each of this investigation, which test to be done, interpretation of the test report, and how to incorporate this report in the management. So why this is important is the candidate should be able to prescribe the right investigation and interpret them correctly, troubleshoot and recognize investigation when they are substandard. So that's what we are expecting from the candidate. The last part is the images. So images are commonly as histopathology and radiology. These are the two common sets of images which we keep. These are more or less quite fixed number of images. If you have actually gone through your training and seen each of this image at least once, very useful, and it's mandatory that you should know, because if you understand how the images pathology look, how the immunohistochemistry interpretation is done, you will be able to troubleshoot again when there is an issue. For example, somebody might tell you a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma on a slide and is a 25-year-old. So it's important to know whether it's a diffuse large B-cell lymphoma or it's a lymphoblastic lymphoma. Because if it's a DLBCL, you have a different protocol. If it's a lymphoblastic lymphoma, you have a different protocol. And if you are not able to differentiate, you are not able to tell which immunohistochemistry, then it becomes a problem. Say you do a TDT, it's positive, it's a lymphoblastic lymphoma. So sometimes your pathologist may not be able to will not be able to tell you the exact thing. So you need to interact with them and get the right investigation done. That's why it is important that these images are seen and you have a good interactive session with your pathologist. The common hematology slides are the ones which I have put up, is acute lymphoblastic leukemia, acute myeloid leukemia, chronic myeloid leukemia, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, acute promyelocytic leukemia, Hodgkin's, Burkitt's, and Hairy cell leukemia, multiple myeloma. So this hairy cell leukemia, you may not be seeing cases, but this will be generally because it has a unique histopathology morphology. So people might keep, and the moment you have such as any of these slides, then the questions pertaining to management and diagnosis will automatically be there. So you actually need to prepare some 10 or 12 of this and be ready for your exam. So in this, you should also understand how a peripheral smear will look, how a bone marrow aspirate will look, how to differentiate between a peripheral smear and a bone marrow aspirate. In a peripheral smear, also look at the different elements of cells there, how an RBC, how a platelet will look, how a basophil will look, how a lymphocyte will look. So all this is during your training. Ensure that at least once or twice your pathologist has shown you this slides. With respect to solid tumors, generally very few slides are kept. Mainly it will be either your hormone positive ER, PR and HER2, whether it's a membrane staining or whether it's a nuclear staining, how will you interpret the score of each? These are the common things which could be asked. Other thing could be a very classical histopathology like a squamous cell carcinoma or an adenocarcinoma. And you could have you should also understand how the algorithm for various immunohistochemistry is performed, and it's important to know what kind of staining is there. So this, with this respect to this, the images you need to prepare accordingly. The last part is the radiology and the radionuclide images. And radiology, we know we can keep either X-rays, CT scans, MRI, PET scan, bone scan, and other radionuclide images. So X-rays, again, very few fixed X-rays. One of these only will generally be kept. Either it's a lytic bone lesion or a fracture of the vertebra, or there are some pulmonary metastasis. There may be a mediastinal mass, pleural effusion, pneumothorax. There could be a mass lesion of the lung. There could be air under diaphragm, which could say it's an obstruction or perforation, and a bone tumor. Generally, one of these X-rays are kept. Prepare the X-rays well. When you read an X-ray, read it clearly, step by step, especially for a bone tumor. Prepare in such a way that you are able to tell all the points how to differentiate whether it's a malignant from a benign bone tumor. And then you tell your differentials according to the findings what you have. Similarly, in CT scans, again, very few things you need to know. You need to know for liver lesions. Generally, they will keep either a triple phase CT or a metastasis or a HCC. An aspergillosis, which is commonly kept on a CT scan, a retroperitoneal mass to discuss the differential diagnosis, an nasopharyngeal mass. Generally, one of this is kept as a part of the CT scan. With respect to MRI, generally either a brain metastasis or a malignant spinal cord compression. PET scan, a PET scan image can be kept. They could discuss and ask you the principles of a PET scan, how to interpret a PET scan. So you need to know when to do a PET scan, when not to do a PET scan. These things you need to prepare. Similarly, in a bone scan, again, the methodology of doing a bone scan, and many places they might keep a super scan, and these are the common PET and bone scan related issues which you could get in your exam. Some rare radionuclides which commonly are used, at least you should know the names and the indications for it, like PMSA, the PRRTs, MIBG, samarium, strontium. So these are the other radionuclides. At least a few words on this you should know. The other radiological images which should be MRCP, ERCP. So in the pathology and radiology images, it is important that their identification by practice. So it's easy if you, in your routine practice, you start seeing scans and X-rays, you should make it a habit of opening your CT scans and X-rays and seeing them. Similarly, you have a pathology, have a meeting at least a month, go and see your slides. And this makes it very important because it also, it boosts your confidence in the management of a patient. And this is only by practice, needs to be seen again and again during your training. And the questions are generally related to the diagnosis and management. So all the best for your exams, and thank you.
Thank you, sir. I will stop the screen sharing.
Sure.
Okay. So the questions in the chats, few questions have been asked. I think I'll start. Someone has asked, can we do a class on pathological imaging? We will try. I want a feedback from all the students. Is this right time or should we do more? Because the crowd was more. We could hardly accommodate 100 people. There are at least 30 people who are waiting. If you can channelize at an institute, one place, you just 5 people see it off, we can easily accommodate more people. It's a suggestion I have. So if the feedback comes, we'll try to do more of them. So I'll open the whole panel audible. So all the faculty can take question individually. I think we lost Venkat, sir. So, few of the questions for Vayo Kosi. So, how do we achieve proliferation in images? You know, all of us are not have a separate dedicated, like in our institute, we have a separate 1 day dedicated pathology review slides. I think big institute, the work is so phenomenal. I think I'll ask Vishwesh sir how the students are trained in your institute for the pathological images.
So the pathology, as I told you, that there are only 7, 8 areas which we need to concentrate, and which we need to see the slides. So in our center, we have twice a month, we have a pathology, oncopathology meeting. So the slides, whichever for that 2 weeks, whatever cases we have, we generally the students go there and then see those slides. But my understanding is that most of the centers which are giving training will have adequately the common slides which I have put up, like leukemias, lymphomas. I think all the centers will have one or two. And the way is to only train them, see them frequently and learn. There's no other way of doing it.
So I got few. I sent the questions to faculty all over India. So few of them have sent some suggestions for students. I'll just go through the slides. So same thing, common mistakes the students make during. I'm. Is this the image shared? Yeah. So writing unrelated information, writing one question lengthy. This has been all been briefed up. I think sometimes one question like real formulation for lymphoma comes. Most of students have not read recently that those are the older ones. They have no clue and they start writing for something else. It looks very out of place and brings your value. I will ask Dr. Shashidhar, if you face one question which we have no idea, so how to approach those questions?
I feel like as the syllabus is quite vast, it is bound to happen that once in a while there can be a question which is quite difficult or unexpected. But what I feel is as we have worked for, students have worked for 3 years in the department, they should be having some idea about any topic, whatever is there, I think we should be having some idea. So I think we just need to think whether we are able to relevantly answer that question. If you know something, then yes, better not leave any question blank, because as far as the policy goes, it's always advisable that we attempt all the questions. So whatever thing we know about that question, just try your best and answer it. If you absolutely do not have any idea about that, then I think we cannot help it. We have to leave it and hope for the best actually.
So Dr. Shashidhar, sometimes when we correct papers, no,
Yes.
the question numbers are written wrong, and as an evaluator, we don't want to fail students, but technicality, we don't have to score those questions, And like if the question number is written wrong or it is half is written in some pages. So
True.
I think question about.
I think we had a experience with this. I think when we both were examiners at one point of examination, like the candidate had not put the question number for a particular answer. Technically speaking, as you told, we are not supposed to evaluate if the question number is not there for the answer. But I think on individual basis, because it's very difficult not to correct it and to deny the student the marks. But I think at the same time, it is always preferable that students take extra care that they have put the question numbers appropriately to all the questions, whatever they have answered, so that they do not leave anything to chance or they do not depend upon others to help them. Because technically we are not wrong in not evaluating those answers. But on humanitarian grounds, I think nobody does that, but it can happen. Like some odd days will be there where people might just refuse to give marks actually. So I think I request that it is very important to put question numbers to the answers.
So for the sake of all the students, I think this is the RGHS pattern which we got it from public domain. This is the pattern of scoring, and this one sheet is for common for all of them. So not only that we want to make your life easy, you have to make life easy for the evaluators. So we will be correcting close to 16, 17 papers per day. If you do writing in an order and write in a structured format, where we can be more happy to give a liberal marks. So I have seen how much we struggle. See, you have to evaluate 4 papers, you have to take average and cumulatively add. So you should make our job more pleasurable if it's not difficult. There are some questions about highlighting the text. I think Dr. Venkat has answered it. So there is always a problem that if you highlight text, it disappears as well as it don't get fudged. RGHS has very strict guidelines, including the color of the pen. You can only use black pen, and only color pencils which are allowed is H&E. I don't know about other institutes. I think even DNB has some guidelines. The clinical examinations questions were not there. I think sir has covered extensively. So, sir, anything to add, sir, from other points of view? The Viva
Maybe are there any of the other persons who want to contribute to whatever I have told in addition? They are welcome.
One point on examination is that candidates should understand that we do not go by single patient as an examination. So holistically, all 3-4 cases you have, we generally we go through all the 3-4 cases, and your performance is then only evaluated. So many times candidate come and say that because of one case and one question, 2 questions which you have asked, he has not answered and the candidate is failed. That is not correct. So examiners make sure that 4 or 5 4 cases which you have, all the 3-4 cases are evaluated, and then we take a combined decision.
So the same feedback which I have taken for the clinical examinations, what students do mistake commonly, they don't they don't know the question and keep on stuck with one question, I think, which is very reasonable. If we don't know, we can go for next. Next, try to fit the clinical findings, which the sir has told. And mostly stress is the cause for most of people. Usually they are very good clinician, otherwise the stress gets them. Too much of investigations, and you should see, we have a the examination, if people can come from institute where they don't have facilities, like some centers don't have PET scan, some centers have everything. They practice highly a lot of volume of immunotherapy. So your answer should be somewhere in the middle, because we don't expect you to know too much and too less. And there are some clinicians who will ask you to show the signs. So whatever you say, how you examine, you have to be stress-free. So this is feedback from the faculty for the scoring well. I think most of things have been told well. And assessment of drugs, I think they should practice from day one. There's no shortcuts in that. So any students want to ask any question or message? I think we are good. So this classes will continue for if it is feedback is there that we can so there's a feedback form is there. You can go through it and try to fill the form. And hopefully this day is fine, then we will try to do more of it. Any questions? So, sir, I think I'll say, allow the faculty to say the last word of the day. Dr. Neil, sir?
Yeah, I think I hope that this was really useful for the students. Let them give a true feedback so that we can decide whether to continue or not.
Dr. Shashi?
Yes, I think I agree with Dr. Linu. Let's take the feedback. And I personally feel that it is useful because practical things will be discussed and you come to know the opinions and what other examiners think. It's really useful, I think, for the students. I think we need to continue if people demand it, actually.
So anyone students want to comment, no, they can raise the hand sign. So I'll pick them up and allow them to speak. There are few people who want to talk. Hello. Next is Dr. Vishwajit. Your final take on the.
Vinayak, it's a good initiative. I think it's learning from both sides, from the student side and from the faculty side also, especially when we get the feedback, we will also know what are the issues they have. So as an examiner also, I think we'll improve.
So Dr. Venkat has left us for in midfield for something. So he has joined us. I'll unmute you, sir. I can say the final word.
What is the question, Vinayak? Sorry, for 10
Nothing.
minutes.
We are done. So any word of thing, how to go forward?
No. I think it's an excellent initiative, and I enjoyed it. And as I said, both the students can give you feedback on WhatsApp, and then we can also learn and we can improve. And I think we should do it regularly. It's very useful. I think excellent work. Thanks for the
I think we
initiative.
can- Sure. Thank you. So I will close the meeting. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Linu, sir, Dr. Shashidhar, Dr. Biswajit, and Dr. Venkat for
Thank
pitching.
you.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.